Last night I had a peculiar dream. I was shopping for movies at a Blockbuster, a store I haven't thought about in years, a store most of you probably haven't thought about in years, and some of you probably don't even know existed in the first place. A lot of you probably only know Blockbuster from Fortnite. I know a lot of the younger generation thinks Fortnite invented the Blockbuster myth, as if Blockbuster is Hercules or something. But it was a real thing and a big part of my childhood growing up. I woke up from the dream immediately after finding the movie and in cold sweat and wet pants because I remembered Blockbuster and all the great things about it. Nowadays, the Blockbuster buildings look like a fucking relic of the Fallout universe. They're dilapidated in shambles or changed into something else. You'll only find used needles there from the drug addicts, or you use it as a place to meet up with your dealer who's your shady cousin and he does business by the dumpster at the old Blockbuster. It's gone. It is a dead business, and the only real example that I can think of a business that level, $6 billion worth, just crumbling in a hurry. They fucking speed ran bankruptcy. I still remember it pretty clear. I could remember one day going to Blockbuster, picking out a nice Nintendo 64 game, or really anything at that matter, a movie, The Mummy, probably for the 40th time. And then the next day, all of a sudden, the Blockbuster's been burnt to the ground and the shareholders have a gun in their mouth ready to pull the trigger. I don't know what happened, so I decided today to research into why Blockbuster failed so spectacularly. Now, before going into this, I had the speculation that it was Netflix that killed Blockbuster, and spoiler alert, Netflix definitely did play a role in putting that nail in Blockbuster's coffin, driving that stake through the vampire's heart. But there's a lot more at play here. Blockbuster wasn't as dumb as I thought they were. Oftentimes it's stated Blockbuster thought that video rentals were the way of the future forever. 2,000 years from now, Blockbuster would still be a household name, people still renting VHS tapes. That's not the case. They knew times were changing, but they just waited too long. They overestimated how much time they had, but they tried a lot of different things that I'd never even heard of. So let's dive into this shit, because it's super interesting.
Mommy's doing a TV commercial!
So let's start at the beginning. Naturally, that's a stupid fucking thing to say, but anyway, it started in 1985 by David Cook, sold 2 years later to 3 investors, and shortly after, by the mid-90s, established itself as the leader in the video rental space, raking in hundreds of millions of dollars along the way. But what was the Blockbuster business model? Was there something wrong with the business model that eventually led to it eating shit? Actually, not really. The business model was pretty fucking sound in my opinion. What they did, Blockbuster would buy bulk movies, buy a whole shit ton of movies, and the idea was they would rent them out to customers until they made more money than they bought the video for by renting it out enough times. Not a bad idea. However, the big portion of their revenue, well, not the big portion, but a large portion of their revenue came from late fees. When you rented a video from Blockbuster, you were expected to bring it back by a certain date. If you failed to meet that deadline, you turn your homework in late, your ass gets hit with the ruler in the Catholic school of Blockbuster. You're getting slapped with a late fee, and they were pretty hefty fines, to be honest. Late fees racked up a lot of money for them, approximately $800 million in late fees alone in the year 2000. Now, during Blockbuster's reign, they were well liked by the majority of people. I don't remember too much shit being talked about them, except for the occasional, oh, goddammit, I forgot my overdue library book here. I've had The Mummy Returns at my house for the last 6 months. This late fee's gonna shave my taint real good. So the late fees were obviously a bit of a sore spot for a lot of people, but it made sense at the time. You were renting the movie, you needed an incentive to give it back, otherwise you're going to rent it and just keep it. And that's exactly what happened, but we'll get to that later because they dropped late fees. Wild, wild west, fucking buildings going up in flames, people being slaughtered in the streets because late fees are gone. It was wild, but we'll get to that in a minute. The year 2000 was a really important year for Blockbuster because that same year, Netflix met with Blockbuster to propose a partnership. Netflix was not like it is in its current day with the streaming service. Netflix back then was a DVD by mail service. Netflix had certain advantages over Blockbuster. Blockbuster was brick and mortar. They had physical locations you'd go to, pick out your movies, rent them, take them home for the day. You could bring them back the next day, bring them back whenever you want, but you got them in person immediately, the quick gratification. You wanted a quick movie because you were about to get laid, you'd go to Blockbuster, just pick out something real quick, and you'd bring it right home. Netflix was very different. You would order your movie, and it was a subscription-based service. It'd be sent through the mail, so you'd have to wait. You didn't have the immediate gratification that you'd have going to Blockbuster, seeing the whole selection and getting what you want. you would have to wait for it to come and you'd have to send it back. So it was a bit cumbersome for a lot of people, but it had one huge advantage over Blockbuster. There were no late fees. And since there was no brick and mortar shops for Netflix, it had a lot lower cost. There wasn't as much overhead. And it was a pretty consumer-friendly business model. It started to spread by word of mouth, but during the time in the year 2000, Blockbuster wanted nothing to do with partnering with Netflix. A lot of people speculate it's because Blockbuster believed video rentals in person would always reign king, but that's not the case. Demonstrated by the fact that Blockbuster did try the DVD by mail service, the on-demand service, the streaming service. We'll get to those in a minute, but they did try those things. The problem was they tried them so late. Obviously, if they had acquired Netflix, it'd be a whole different world. Blockbuster would probably be the one world government by this point. It was massive. Now, you obviously know what happens next. Netflix blows Blockbuster out of the water, and it's absolutely massive. But Blockbuster didn't think that it was going to be as quick as it was, and that was what eventually led to their undoing. Blockbuster tried a lot of different things, but while they were experimenting with new ways of veering away from their primary income being rentals, they were still opening new stores. They had 9,000 locations by 2004. Now there is a single location left in 2019, and that location is in Oregon, Bend, Oregon, if I'm remembering correctly. But what my point is, during the year 2000 to 2004, they were still opening a shitload of stores. There was a Blockbuster in every fucking square block. You couldn't throw a rock without hitting a Blockbuster somewhere. They were still expanding massively while still relying on a kind of obsolete business model at this point in time because Netflix was proving to be the consumer's choice at this point. Growing up, I didn't know about Netflix. My parents were diehard Blockbuster fans, enthusiasts, Blockbuster foam fingers, so we stuck with Blockbuster till the bitter end. But I understand, looking at the data now, Netflix was on the rise, killing it the entire time. But the reason Blockbuster walked away from the Netflix deal is because they preferred to compete with Netflix, and they were attempting to compete. They weren't so ingrained in their ways that they weren't willing to try new things. They partnered with Enron to create a video-on-demand service, a streaming service, and it's not too dissimilar from what Netflix did. The problem was, Blockbuster didn't dive in with both feet. They just dipped the tip of their dick into the water to test it out, and while they were doing this, still opening new stores as profits were dwindling, and they didn't commit to trying this new business model, the VOD, video on demand, and Enron goes bankrupt, the entire service crumbles, and they just kind of brush it away. It's a loss, and it would have probably saved the company. They could have adapted on the curve, been ahead of the game, 2 steps, 3 steps ahead of Netflix, way fucking ahead of them, but they didn't commit because they wanted to stay primarily video rental. They didn't want to go too far out of their comfort zone, but they did recognize that things were changing. They just underestimated how fast those things were changing.
There's one near you.
Blockbuster Video. Wow, what a difference.
So after the Enron experiment completely dissolved in 2001, which it was an extremely innovative idea for its time, it's a real fucking shame that it didn't jumpstart streaming videos, but once Blockbuster kicked its shit on that one, they tried again to stay relevant with the changing times in August of 2004 when they announced their own DVD by mail service. It sounds pretty similar to Netflix because it is. It's exactly what Netflix was offering, but shittier. Netflix had established itself as the go-to for DVD by mail. They were efficient, they were fast, they were friendly. They had the good graces of everyone on their side, and Blockbuster was clearly just trying to milk the tits of this cow, trying to get in because they knew shit was about to get bad for them. 2004 was the last year that Blockbuster saw profits. After 2004 is when Blockbuster noticeably nosedives. $6 billion in 2004, 2005 it drops to $5 billion, and it only keeps dropping hard as shit. Now, in 2004, they also got rid of the late fees. Going into 2005, they decided to outright drop the late fees and do an entire massive marketing campaign about the absence of late fees, which was a bit misleading because they weren't entirely gone, but I'm sure if you grew up in the 90s or even the early 2000s, you probably remember the Blockbuster commercials where you had the Twitter mob of angry people with pitchforks, pickaxes, and signs all marching towards a Blockbuster saying, we don't want any late fees, and then Blockbuster drops the thing that says no late fees, and then everyone's stunned and cheers, yeehaw. Those commercials were all over the place. This was their Hail Mary for the most part. Late fees were always their Achilles heel. That was the one thing that people didn't like about Blockbuster, but it was a necessary evil because if you don't have an incentive to bring the movie back, no one's bringing that shit back. So during this revolution of no more late fees, what would happen is Blockbuster gave you a 7-day grace period after the due date. So if you brought the movie back late, but it was within that 7-day grace period, you didn't suffer any punishments, you were let off, your sins forgiven, absolved. But if you still refused to comply to Blockbuster's demand, you were then charged for the entire cost of the movie. And that's how they were running it. And it worked to a certain extent, but by that time it was already starting to be obsolete to be renting shit in the first place because there were better options. And in a last-ditch effort to save Blockbuster's dying business model, in 2006 they launched Blockbuster Total Access. Full goatsy assholes getting fully stretched, there's no prolapse, subscription-based DVD rental online, the whole nine. The last attempt for them to jerk off and ejaculate into this market, this beast that they helped create, to try and stay a relevant company. And it actually worked for 1 year. One glorious golden year, baby, that those execs are still looking back on with a semi-chub. In 1 year, by the end of 2006, beginning of 2007, they had 2.2 million subscribers, and they were doing pretty well. The business model was sound as well. You would order a DVD online, get it shipped to you. When you're done with the DVD, you take it back to a Blockbuster location and get another movie the same day if you'd like. So you could keep trading in movies in and out. It was efficient, it was fast, and it worked well because Blockbuster had 5,000 stores at this time. A lot of places to trade that shit in. But unfortunately, it didn't last long. And you know how the story goes from there. In September of 2010, Blockbuster finally declares bankruptcy. And it's not long after that all the Blockbusters in the world slowly start getting Thanos snapped away. And now there's just that single lonely Blockbuster left in Oregon. Blockbuster failed not for a lack of understanding that things were changing, but from a lack of recognizing the speed at which things change. They did have their foot in the door, ready to adapt with Enron in '99. In fact, that Enron deal was a game changer. Their deal was so good, it would have jump-started video streaming by 9 years. Enron and Blockbuster, Enron wanted to broadcast movies via fiber optics, so you'd on your TV press View Movie, and you would be immediately able to watch that movie on your TV, no having to go get a physical copy or anything. It was so ahead of the game, such an innovation, but Blockbuster didn't give a fuck. They didn't care enough about it, and eventually it all just crumbled. That would have been huge. Who knows where technology, or at least technology in this field, would be by now? Streaming services are only just now exploding thanks to Netflix, who got in it much later than Enron did. It's really a wild thing to think about, and Blockbuster's undoing really just came from the lack of ability to see how quick things can advance in the entire industry. Really interesting story, and I do have to say, when I think about Blockbuster, I got a tear in my eyes and a little wet spot in my shorts because it really was such a big part of growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it always was a positive experience. You would go to Blockbuster and it'd be more than just there for business, like, hey, I want this movie, or hey, I know there's tits at this scene in the movie, I want to go home and get hard. You would go there, peruse the whole store. The staff there was usually pretty friendly too. You just kind of kick back, talk about movies, look at games and shit. It was so nice. Brick and mortar's kind of going out of fashion across the globe for good reason. It's obsolete. Malls are obsolete, GameStops, all of it. There's no reason for it except to go there for the experience of looking around and checking shit out in physical form. There's merit to it, but let's be honest, being able to download something, being able to look up shit online is far more convenient, far more thorough, and just the all-around better choice. I don't think there's any chance Blockbuster is going to make a resurgence, at least not in its previous form or any form even recognizable to what Blockbuster was, but it really is an interesting view at a company that had it all and how quickly it just ate shit. What an incredible legend of Blockbuster. Please keep it in your thoughts and remember the lessons that we take away from Blockbuster. Don't make your business model reliant on fucking your customers in the ass with late fees, because it does eventually bite you in the ass when you get a competitor that doesn't have that. That's about it. Take it easy, everyone. See ya.